Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is Georgiana Uhlyarik, and I am the Frederick S. Eaton Curator of Canadian Art. We come to you today from the territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and the summer home of the Seneca. The area around the Great Lakes has always been a gathering place, and in more recent years, it has welcomed peoples from around the world. And in 1968, it welcomed Tim Whiten, who was born just south of Detroit in a small town called Inkster. And he arrived in Toronto in 1968 to begin his career in teaching at York University, where he is today Professor Emeritus. In over 40 years of creating cultural objects, Tim Whiten has sought to navigate the territory of the human condition with the intent of inviting experiences and encouraging sensing over reading. Whiten's work extends from 2 to 3-dimensional forms and includes ritual performances, real-time systems, site-specific and mixed media installations. His work is held in public, private, and corporate collections, including the National Gallery of Canada, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Art Gallery of Hamilton, the Tom Thomson Art Gallery, and the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. And in Toronto, he's represented by Olga Korper Gallery. It is a great privilege to welcome Tim Whiten today to our conversation, along with Sherry Phillips, who is our curator of contemporary art, as well as a conservator. Maybe she just got promoted. Maybe Sherry just got promoted. Sherry Phillips is our conservator of contemporary art, as well as responsible for our Inuit collection. And Sherry and Tim have worked together for many years in caring for the works by Tim that are in the Art Gallery of Ontario's collection. So welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Nice to be here.
I thought today what we would do, since both of you have worked together so closely, I thought that we could focus on, first of all, Tim, the relationship you have to materials and process. You have said in the past that process is what guides you and leads you to your selection of materials, and what those materials in turn end up meaning for you, and then how these are received by someone like Sherry, who has to care and document and understand the importance of installation process, of the materials themselves, and your original intention when it comes to these materials, and how that transforms the work that she does, so that these works continue to hold the same meaning as they have for you for generations to come, when none of us are around anymore, that people truly understand what the original intention was and how these materials really need to function. So do you want to start there, Tim, to speak to the way in which you work in terms of process and how that leads you to materials and what these materials mean to you?
Well, it's difficult to do that simply because when you speak about my use of materials, the choice of materials in the work comes out of my everyday experience. Say, for example, everybody in the world has chewed chewing gum, I guess, pretty much one way or the other, as children or otherwise. But the nature of the process of chewing gum itself became important to me because I started to think about what was going on in that process. I started to consider the nature of being able to extend that in a way in which others might experience or think about the nature of their own experience in relation to it. But I also developed some concerns for what would be essentially the historic importance of what was contained in that material. We've actually, over years, started to understand a lot about DNA. And that got me thinking about the nature of the works that are in the caves. Let's go years and years and years ago, where it seems as if someone scooped out some carbon from a fire and put in their mouth, chewed it, and spat on the wall of the cave. But an interesting notion, the image we're talking about is important, but the nature of the image and how it was made is critically important, because if we understand DNA, the presence of those individuals will be there forever. And so in relation to the chewing gum, that is actually provided in the works that I do indicates that I'm present always, ever, forever, whenever that piece is actually available. And others can encounter me and it through their experience personally.
You're speaking about a work in our collection called Lithium, and I'm just going to forward the images so people can have a sense of the work that we're speaking about. It was a work that was commissioned in 2008 when the EGO underwent a transformation. So this was a piece that was created specifically for us. You have started to work with human skulls, just so that people have a sense of what they're looking at, in 1977, is that right?
Yeah, around then, a little bit earlier, but pretty much that time, yeah.
And so in this piece, what you have is you have a number of important images that have been part of your visual vocabulary since that time. So what we're talking about specifically are these skulls, and you have covered them always. I think you began by covering them in leather, is that right?
I'm sorry?
You began by covering them in leather?
Well, some were covered in leather, but I think that the nature of covering became important in the sense of covering as an aspect of my work is dealt with on an ongoing basis, depending largely on what the cover is, because essentially to conceal most often for me is to reveal.
Mm. So in these works, when you look at these works, Sherry, where do you begin working with Tim when you receive these works in the collection?
Yeah, so I tend to, whenever something, particularly a work of art that comes in that's very mixed media, I like to spend just some quiet time with my own thoughts and try to think about what it is, if I can anticipate any kind of aging properties or characteristics within the materials, and then how best to preserve that. And part of my process through looking is measuring and documenting all the different layers. So it's kind of an analytical documentation process. And then once I feel a little bit more comfortable about what I'm looking at, then I can engage, I think, more fully with an artist, in this particular case, Tim, and we can start to talk about why he chose the materials, what is important about the materials to Tim, and how I then reflect that in what I do as a conservator. Because I may initially have a notion or an idea of what I want to do, but then in conversation with an artist or an image maker, as Tim likes to be called, my first inclination may actually be incorrect. For instance, when Tim and I were talking during the acquisition of this piece, Tim is very aware that the chewing gum may bloom. So it may develop a kind of a white efflorescence on the surface, but Tim is very happy with that. Mm-hmm. So as a conservator, we tend to reverse or reduce the appearance of bloom on a painting surface that might not be desired. But in this case, it is desired. So I would leave it. And so my conversation with Tim would then change. It would become, okay, the bloom is acceptable, but is there a point beyond which the bloom is no longer acceptable? Does it, for instance, Tim, I'll just ask you the question since I have you here. Is there a point beyond which the bloom is too much? It obscures too much of the artwork, and then you'd like to reduce it.
Yeah, I think there is a point that takes place, but I think it's important for me to recognize my relationship with you, because I think part of that has a lot to do with your sensibility as well as a conservator, to see the nature of how things are going to break down to the point where it can't exist anymore. And I think one of the wonderful things that I have as a dialogue with you, Sherry, is to allow you to recognize those things which actually, if they become something that's problematic, to actually recognize the need to control or affect some differences. And so that dialogue to me is an important dialogue, because it's also about the dialogue that is involved with the work, because the work is all of those things. It's not just the thing, it's the nature of engagement about the thing too.
Right. And in this particular work, it's that engagement that I personally find very exciting, because I'm always learning something new. So when this first came into the collection, I then start researching, and thank goodness for the internet, I start researching the history of chewing gum and what it means, and how the material in modern chewing, not historic chewing gum, but modern chewing gum, what those materials might mean, and can I then predict how they might age, and what, if not me, then a conservator after me might have to deal with it, and how might that impact future treatments. So when you start thinking about modern chewing gum, yes, it incorporates Tim's saliva and DNA and all that stuff, and that's something that we need to preserve. So we have to think very carefully about bloom, because when we start removing that, are we removing evidence of Tim?
Yeah.
I can't do that. But how do we balance that with so much bloom or other things that are emerging from the chewing gum? It may not be saliva based. It might have something to do with the polymers or the remnants of the sugars or the sweeteners or the softening agents that are in modern chewing gum. That may all be mixed up in this really weird chemical soup. So if we want to preserve the appearance of this thing and reduce, we have to understand what we are also risking, which is evidence of Tim. So this is a bigger conversation with the artists, with the curators, with everybody involved in the care of this artwork, to plan for its future and how far we can go with things.
This is Tim at his most problematic, because at some point I engage everyone in one way or another forever.
Yes.
That's problematic. See, I find that wonderful.
So do I. This is wonderful. This is why it's great to work with you, Sherry, because you understand where I'm going with it.
Oh, thanks, Tim.
I think it's fascinating that what we're speaking about right now is the kind of transformation that takes place at a molecular level, but we're actually speaking about something that is quite imaginary and conceptual. So when I look at these particular works that are on screen right now, and I see the vibrant color, and I know that in the past, Tim, you have spoken about using natural color, that you don't change much when you use color, but rather the colors that are already born within the materials. And even when you worked with graphite, there's so much color already built into that, and how important that is to you. So when you're speaking about changes at a chemical, physical, molecular level, eventually the kind of work that you and Sherry have to be involved with is an imaginary world where you have to imagine how this color, this pink that I look at, or this green that I look at, may transform into the future, and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
Well, yeah, I guess in a sense, what we're doing is actually looking at the nature of the changing condition of the worlds which we participate in. And I think it's important for me to say that, because we don't participate only in one world. At times, what we see in the world about us is only an indication of a world which we don't see. That's something that will actually take place in time. And in many cases, considering how we begin to advance our consciousness, we can understand what it is to participate.
Right.
And that participation for me is critical.
Right. And in this work that we do with the museum, it's almost like that is also a core relationship in terms of participation. Who gets to participate in the installation of the work and how they get to participate in it is something that you build into a work coming into the collection.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, not only the people who are involved with the installation, but the people who care for the work, the people who come to see the work, everybody contributes one way or another. And I think all of those elements in itself make a whole, which is part of the understanding that I recognize as partly about us being human.
Right, right. So if we can, so right now Sherry is actually sitting in the Art Gallery of Ontario, in the J.S. McLean Center for Indigenous and Canadian Art, besides Metamorphosis, which came into the collection some years ago. And now I believe this might be its third or fourth version of its installation. So it's a piece that has a number of components. The way that it's this image right now, you also see the 4 documentary photographs. So in 1978, you had yourself sewn into this tanned bear skin by two taxidermists. Is that right, Tim?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And then the performance, sort of the kind of you metamorphosized, if you like, from having arrived from the United States, and now this was your arrival in Toronto after a decade of being here. Is that right?
Well, I guess that's an interpretation that's given, but the interpretation is actually only limited based upon how people see what the trajectory of my physical involvement here in Toronto. Because the concept of the piece really originated much earlier. And it came to fruition in Toronto based upon my understanding and being in a new place with concerns that would actually advance my understanding as a human being and as a teacher.
Right. So, Sherry, since you're beside it, do you want to speak a little bit to some of the elements that are right beside you?
Sure. So I wrote a small article earlier in our COVID shutdown about the need for being very mindful of the potential for damage from pest control, or the ongoing efforts in integrated pest management within the building, even though we were shut to the public. So the bear skin was removed and I popped it into our freezer just as a preventive measure. If there was something there, that would eradicate it. And it also just protects it while no one is really here other than one day a week to kind of monitor these things. But one of the things that we don't talk about very often are the eggshells. So Tim and Megan, his assistant, spent months collecting 85 pounds of crushed eggshells. So when this first came into the building, I often work with a counterpart in our health and safety department. So I checked with Tim, and sure enough, he had collected the eggshells, but they hadn't otherwise been treated. So while I don't think in this part of in Canada or in Ontario we have a real issue with salmonella, it's still a potential issue on raw eggshells. So because they hadn't been treated, our head of health and safety at the time was worried that when this is on public display, is that a risk? So I talked with Tim about treating the eggshells before we put them on public display. He was totally fine with what my approach was, which was basically just making a very dilute bleach water. And I got this online with public health about how to disinfect and what would work with salmonella. And I spent several days essentially washing the eggshells and laying them out to dry. And so that helps from a microbiological point of view, but it's also going to help if there was anything else hiding in the eggshells. And to date, it hasn't been an issue at all. So, and it was so dilute that it really didn't do anything to the white eggshells anyway. But, so that was something I'd never done before. Thanks.
So you can see how I engage others to be able to participate in the work. And Sherry's good because she recognized that immediately and moved towards doing something. So the kind of relationship that is established there becomes a particularly important relationship. It's not just the thing, it's the nature of how the relationship is developed because of the thing.
Right. So then this, I think that sometimes your work has been described as a living artifact. I don't know.
That's a pretty good short description, yeah.
And so there's something even, you know, as you speak about the way in which everyone is transformed in encountering these materials, the way in which they're installed, but the transformation really takes place inside of us, right? Right. When, you know, you have spoken in the past about fascination with alchemy, right? And alchemy being a kind of transcendence from one kind of material into another. But really it's about how that kind of alchemical process can happen inside of our own minds and our own imagination, that we are able to transcend the physical realities in which we are contained, which is our physical body.
Yeah, it's about consciousness. I mean, there's an interesting development over the years. We've actually become concerned and interested in trying to track the notion of our historic consciousness. And those things actually provide for us understandings about not only who we were, who we are, but also who we can be. who we can become. But the work is constantly about that. It's not just a thing again, it's the nature of all those things which are the developing consciousness which we all participate in. And the degree of our participation really amplifies or helps it or either hinders it.
Right. And that is the way that we can also be transported over time. Would you agree with that?
Well, no, I'm not sure, because time is a construct. We construct that. There is no such thing as time. Time is an extension of our consciousness to be able to understand what is actually we are experiencing on one level. But we are experiencing multiple things at the same time.
As from a practical point of view, the installation of this piece in and of itself has gone through a number of variations before it arrived at the AGO. And I will just quickly go through some of the images. So these are photographs of you in 1978, coming out of the bearskin, trying to not use your hands as you're coming out. Is that right? Is that what a description of the performance?
Well, yeah, well, okay. What we have on the screen are essentially getting sewn into the bearskin by the two taxidermists. And it's interesting because the first stage of doing this process was literally putting myself in the hands of other people to take care of me for something like 4 or 5 hours while I was sewn into this thing.
Right.
And then at some point later, getting back into it at some point and actually being able to find my way out without assistance from anyone.
And then it says this is the completion. So in 1980, was this at Beaugé in Vancouver? Is this image from there?
This was Beaugé, Toronto.
Uh-huh.
This was the third stage, because the second stage was the position of the bearskin on the eggshells in Vancouver. The third stage was actually getting back into the bearskin and getting out without the use of my hands. Right.
And then this was another public iteration. I believe this is at Olga Korper's gallery, right?
That's
where you
correct.
imagined this piece in this vitrine that you've constructed for it.
Exactly, yes.
And then we'll just go back to this and Sherry in the space. So when the work came into the collection, there was, you spoke about it already, a gathering of people around in order to install it in the first place. Is that a process you speak about openly, or is that a kind of ritualistic installation process that is for those who are installing it?
Well, it's a combination of both, but it's primarily for those who are installing in order to set up the organization of the piece for which people can experience what seems to be a most worthwhile experience. So there are certain conditions surrounding that would amplify the way in which others can approach the work and respond to their own experience.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think because I have been so involved in the preservation of the physicality of Tim's work, and through the preservation of the physicality, also the conceptual nature of it, and it's about trying to preserve authenticity. I think opening that up to others who are involved in it, it brings us much closer to the art. So we become, possessive isn't the right word, but we just understand it, we know it better.
Well, and they participate, of course.
Participating, exactly. And it's a very special thing to be involved with it. So when this was first installed in Wanda's show over in the Contemporary Tower a number of years ago, we actually videotaped it so that we would have a record of that first, because Tim was here with us. So we had Tim actively engaged in helping us learn how to do this ritual, set up the ritualistic space, basically. Yeah. And we sometimes do that with artworks, especially if the artist is available, because it just brings so much more depth and meaning to what we're doing, but also for people in the future, so they can watch this and perhaps understand a little bit better about what's required.
So Sherry, because you're beside it, will you speak to the elements? Because there's a number of them. The bearskin we talked about, the eggshells.
So there's the ritual vessel, which is the bearskin, and then it's basically a cushion. And then it's on a bed of concentric circles of eggshells. And then at each compass point, there's a candle, a votive candle, and also a little tiny incense, a stick incense holder, or a square, little, right there, little ceramic piece. So as we're installing it, it's not me so much, it's part of our installation team. We set out the diameter of the circle, and then we work from the center in concentric rings, and we just make sure that every single floor, or in this case, platform space, is covered in the eggshell fragments. And then the votive candles are set up at the compass points. And then there's the burning of the incense that is allowed to burn to its conclusion. And the ash is left on the floor or on the, in this case, on the platform. That has since gone. I think because it's ash, it's very lightweight. And as people move through the space, it just eventually disappears. Yeah.
It permeates the space, though.
It does. It's here under the wall, tucked into little nooks and crannies. It's here.
It's how Tim really truly becomes everywhere through the chewing gum and the DNA and the burning. You're just constantly becoming one with what we are already, of course, one with.
Exactly, yeah. Just amplifying that oneness, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. I know, we've spoken about participation in this very, an invitation to participate with such works, oftentimes, because people are very tactile and they do love touching things. I know that every now and again we have visitors who want to participate in a way perhaps that they're not so much invited to participate, especially in terms of the eggshells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that again is essentially problematic to some extent, but one can expect, of course, that would to some extent take place. Right. Because there is an inquisitiveness, especially children. I find children are most inquisitive, and they're the first one wants to find out if they can get involved in one way or another. And I think sometimes we have to recognize that, at least accommodate it to some degree, as long as it's not detrimental to the work or to them.
Right. Well, I think there's something about the sense of touch, the sense of touch being almost the first sense, the one sense that we can't reverse. Like you can reverse sight, you can reverse hearing, but touch, it feels to me, is the primary way through which we get to know the world,
Exactly.
Yeah. So it kind of confirms that we were here or we were in a place, it's like if I'm visiting another country, I'm always walking along, touching the walls of these buildings that, I've seen in art history books, but if I can actually touch them, like I really feel like I was there.
Well, Sherry, think about me being sewn inside the bearskin.
Right.
The nature of touch that was actually incredibly intense during that period of time, being contained in this skin.
Did you feel claustrophobic at any time?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I had to get over it because I had to become comfortable with that sensation and allow it rather than to try and struggle with it. Once I was able to be comfortable with it, things moved along wonderfully. It was like being cared for in a very real way.
Yeah.
That speaks to the trust. And I think, it extends to the way in which you are talking to one another, Sherry and Tim, that there's a trust that's built over time between the maker and the one that is taking care of the work. Is there any? Go ahead.
I consider my role together with the curators as the voices for the artists when they can't be here for whatever reason.
It's a good voice. I love it.
Thanks, Tim. Like, we really do advocate for what is best for the artwork. And we only understand that through long conversations with the artist or the maker to understand like what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. And then if I ever have a question, I know I can always call Tim. I mean, it's wonderful. He's very open, and I can just call him if I have a question or something I don't understand.
Right. Tim, was there any particular reason that it was a bear skin that you chose?
Well, there are a number of reasons, but I think at some point the basic reason is essentially recognizing the condition of hibernation that takes place with those animals, and how that hibernation itself becomes indicative of a transformation. It's almost the same way as we think about butterflies going into a cocoon, coming from a cocoon. and finally sprouting wings as a result of having been captive for a period of time. So in a way, I was sprouting wings after having been contained in this bearskin and being cared for a long period of time by two people who were sewing me into it. I had no choice but to trust them.
Right. But there's something interesting about that kind of that kind of understanding that you get that by not resisting, actually, there's a built-in, not comfort, I'm not sure what the word, I'm struck, for example, conversations I've had with Susie Lake when she was tied into this puppet structure, and there were people who were pulling her strings, and she understood that the less she fought against them, that you said about that relationship with the trust and the respect and the care, that the easier it was on her body, which doesn't mean that she stopped understanding what her condition was, but rather that there was a built-in communication understanding that the less she resisted, the more she was able to actually perform her piece.
Yeah, there is a transformation of consciousness which takes place once you don't resist anymore. You stop resisting and you understand at another level something which is actually taking place that you participate in.
Right. Now, we have one more work that you shared with us, Tim, and I think it's a work that is still in progress. Is that correct?
No, I think that the work that you speak about is called Respite, and it's complete.
It is complete.
It was shown this past year in an exhibition.
You sent us this amazing photograph of you working on is found glass, that purpley blue is a found glass?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And we don't really get a sense of how large it is until we're looking, not even in this this image. It's
about 12 by 11 by 29.
Right. When you look at it, Sherry, what are the first questions you might begin to ask about this piece as you're looking at it?
Well, the first thing I do is, of course, get dimensions. But then I'd start to look at the white material. Like, where is the wood, Tim? Is that the base or is that an internal substructure?
It's actually, the wood structure is essentially constructed as a basic house with sitting on a platform. So all of that's wood.
Okay.
And then over top of that, we actually apply the glass.
What is the white material?
It's glass. It's broken glass.
No. In the image on the right side of my screen, there's a lot of...
Yeah, it's broken glass as well. It's just white glass. It's milk glass.
Oh, I getcha. I can't tell from the photographs.
Yeah, it's difficult for the photograph, but those are actually shards of white glass as well as shards of cobalt blue glass that are covering the wooden structure.
Oh, it's beautiful. So what did you apply on the wooden structure to adhere the glass to it?
There was the use of acrylic gel, heavy acrylic gel medium to be able to apply as a binder.
It depends entirely. I'm sure it's very structurally sound because I know the way Tim constructs his artwork.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah, so as long as it's, like the vibration is, you don't have an issue with vibration, then I suspect this is going to last. It's going to be fine. And the nice thing about acrylic gel medium is it's clear. I imagine that's why you chose it. So you maintain the transparency and sparkliness of the glass, but it's also easy to redo if you need to. So this is not going to, it's kind of like your repair almost, it's like it seems like it's going to be a very sound artwork actually.
Yeah, there's one kicker part of it which is not visible in the images that you see that were actually a part of the production in my small space. There is a blue rose which is made of broken glass also. Ooh. That is attached to the work. And the blue rose is probably about 3 inches in diameter. It's a stage of where beyond just a bud, it's just starting to open, but it's a blue rose made of blue glass as well. It's cobalt blue glass. That's not visible in the photographs that you see, I'm sorry.
That's all right. When you go to your website, the first image that comes up is actually that blue rose.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yes.
Very
Beautiful.
important. It's a very important way of introducing the work to you.
Right. So I would ask a question about the glass, and this is glass you've collected over time, or this is glass that you sourced?
Well, it's sourced and collected over time, a combination, because the concern was trying to get the volume of glass necessary to achieve my ends in relation to this work and series of other works that were using cobalt, and trying to get access to the amount of glass that was necessary. We got a hold to a place on Queen Street, which was a restaurant supplier that had a volume of cobalt blue glass that we purchased and we broke up in order to be able to use it for this purpose. So the volume of glass that we are using is quite extraordinary. And I'm not sure that you're aware that cobalt blue glass is not easy to come by, particularly because of the nature of the process that's used in constructing it and the materials that are available or are lacking availability throughout the world now.
Right.
Right.
I think that fabricators and other workers and other studios is yet another way in which you invite others to participate. You've worked with glass over many years, and so there's another way in which you bring people into your work to create the images and the forms that you seek to create. You kind of invite everyone to partake in that.
Yeah, well, my work is actually the stuff that I do every day. The results of my work is essentially the things that I call cultural objects. So we have a range of people that are participating with me in doing a lot of these things that is almost incredible to understand in terms of the contact, the involvement, the information, and how we work together. And it's incredible because that continues. It doesn't stop when the work is physically put forward. It continues and all of a sudden extends. So for example, here now, Sherry and I are connecting on another level, the same way with all of the other people who actually work with me during the time that I'm working, which is every day.
Right, right.
The work is every day. The results of the work is the gifts that I offer to other people.
And that extends to me too, because when I was first working with the eggshells, I thought, how on earth, if anything ever happened to these eggshells, how would I replace them? I know what Tim and Megan did, but what would I do? So I'm very fortunate to work in an institution where I have lots of people that I can collaborate with. So I called our chefs. I said, how many eggs do you use in a week? Apparently they go through 30 dozen white eggs a week. So I thought, this is easy. If ever I need to, for whatever reason, I have a ready source of white eggshells.
Now she's connected to the chefs, see?
Great.
Talk about extending consciousness into the kitchen where it's very important to have it.
Exactly. Well, it's always extending consciousness, and at some point, the more people it touches, the better.
Yes.
And this is the beautiful thing, because Tim's gift to us is this extension of consciousness, but then I can then extend that to other people who are actually really pleased to be able to participate. Not that I've had to ask them for eggshells, but just to give them a chance in their day to think about something different and to think about like what they might do one day for the good of the collection. Like it's a really wonderful position to be able to give that to people and extend the invitation to participate. It's a lovely feeling.
So it's a participation in consciousness, and why not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's beautiful, and I think we might, we're almost at 45 minutes, but I think it's a beautiful place to end this notion that I think the idea of art can be quite alienating to a number of people, but the way that you speak about it, Tim, and in your work with Sherry, you reveal that there are so many ways in, because it is every day, because we are all alive in the same way, and because we all communicate through our consciousness one to another with those that came before and those who will come into the future. And that these objects, in a way, are vessels, the way in which our bodies are vessels to think about and to imagine something that's beyond us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Good. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing this with us. I know that everyone who walks by this work is also beautifully invited to walk around it, which again is an experiential feeling, is a feeling of connection in that way, in that kind of endless circle when you walk around an object. We're very fortunate to have it in the collection, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today and wish you all the best and all your loved ones to be safe and healthy and cared for.
Thanks, Georgiana. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.